What's going on, guys? It's Matt with the FF Mediators and the Face Off Sports Network, and we're about to do another live trade show. This time, I've got Sam from Dynasty Drip joining us. So, everybody, welcome in, Sam. How you doing, man?
I'm good, dude. As we were talking, fun day finally to get just a little, whatever you want to call it, a little drug inserted into your arm of free agency. Some of these things matter, some of these things do not matter, but they're still fun to at least see your phone buzzing and your league chats finally starting to become active again. And happy to be joining on the channel for the first time today. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. We're happy to have you here. Be sure to go follow Dynasty Drip on X and YouTube. We've got a bunch of content coming out on our end. He's going to be working with us a little bit, so we're excited to have him here. We're excited to talk some Dynasty trades today and kind of look at the market and see where we're at right now. You already mentioned opening of free agency was today, so lots of big news to cover. We've got people moving teams, changing places, but let's just jump right into it. And the first guy I want to talk about, Sam, is Jalen Waddle. So wide receiver from the Miami Dolphins. He's currently sitting as the 73rd player overall in startup rankings. So this is based on real drafts, pulling dynasty startups from Sleeper. And when we look at Jalen Waddle, I want to ask you first, Sam, do you think he's a buy or a sell in your mind?
I definitely wouldn't be selling Waddle at the moment. I think just due to the fact that we have seen his rank be higher in the past couple years. And, you know, whether it's injury or just kind of this slow lack of usage due to Tyreek Hill, his value hasn't really grown over the past couple seasons. But I think a lot of us still believe he potentially has that upside. So I guess I don't know if I'm fully buying, but it really does depend on price, right? If you're looking for a good wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 with a little upside, I think Waddle could be your guy. It really just depends on kind of what your team is looking at. He's a tricky one. And I think that's why we're talking about him today, is that I don't think he's obvious buy. He's not an obvious sell like some players people kind of can come to some consensus on.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of with you there. He's not someone I'm necessarily shopping if I absolutely have to, but, you know, I'd be interested in buying if I'm looking for that wide receiver 3 to add to my team. So he's definitely an interesting player. Let's pull up the recent trades here and see if we can't just break down a few of these. This first one right here I see is Jalen Waddle for Brandon Ayuk and Romeo Doubs. Where do you fall on that? I'm not sure how you believe in Romeo Doubs myself. I'm not necessarily the biggest believer, but it kind of seems like a little bit of a drop back from Waddle to Ayuk.
Yeah, for me, man, I'm definitely going the Waddle side. I think this could have been a toss-up if you have a healthy Brandon Ayuk, but that's something you're just going to have to build in to this trade, right? And I would much rather have the guy who is not coming off a devastating knee injury if we're kind of just doing a one-for-one swap. And I'm really not accounting Romeo Doubs much in this trade at all. I think he's a guy that, yeah, you know, he could help you out come bye weeks, but to me, he's more of a throw-in the same way a late third-round pick would be a throw-in, that he's not really swinging this deal in either direction for me personally.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It doesn't really sway me either. I really do view it as just a third round pick. But let's just jump to this one right here where it's Jalen Waddle for Xavier Worthy. Worthy's going a little bit later in the 6th round of the ADP here on Dynasty Data Lab. But, you know, it's not crazy because I've seen a lot of rankings out there that actually have Xavier Worthy ahead of Jalen Waddle. So it's kind of a toss-up here of, do you want the unknown of Worthy and what he could be as he grows in this Chiefs offense, or do you want to stick with Waddle and what we know of him being a PPR guy?
Yeah, I think this one's risky, especially I'm looking at the date on the trade over here, 3/8, and I could be wrong, but that may have been the day that Worthy news story, not news story, whatever you want to call it, he wasn't charged, so I don't think, I don't want to talk about it necessarily, but I'm curious if that trade may have been triggered by that news. Assuming he's not being charged, which is the news now, and even if he is going to be charged, man, nothing's going to happen for 2 to 3 years. I'm going Xavier Worthy on that one. I do really like Jalen Waddle, but you do still have to take into account how his past couple seasons has been. and how his career has gone so far, man. He's gone down in receptions every year in his career, with his rookie year being his highest reception total. I think he only had like 50 something catches last year. Now, injury has a part to do in that. I think no Tua Tagovailoa. Like, there's a lot of things in that Miami offense. Tyreek Hill being there, Achane, but those things are not changing yet. Now, we may thought Tyreek Hill was going to leave at some point, but it seems like they have come to a conclusion and he's sticking around. So I think worthy for sure on that side. How do you feel about that one? Are you scared away by the potential, whatever Worthy's doing in his free time?
Yeah, whatever allegation is out there, that's the way I'm gonna view it. I'm not worried about it at all. We see this unfortunately happen a lot in the NFL. Whether he did it or didn't do it, we don't have to talk about that. But what we do know is the NFL most of the time kicks this thing down the road until whatever case is filed is completed. And, I'm happy to say with legal experience, those cases don't happen quick. So I don't think that there really should be any impact on what you're doing fantasy wise right now. Just wait and see. It's not really worth moving anything. I don't think it necessarily amount to a huge suspension either. But regardless, I think you made a great point there about Waddle of, there's a lot of factors that you could point to in his play, but there's also outside factors of Tua Tagovailoa. Like, if he's been hurt a lot, that definitely impacts his ability to catch the ball. So Miami's such an interesting situation with what you do with Tua. But Sam, we've got a few people in the chat here already. So if you guys are here, be sure to throw your comments in there. If you've got a trade, let us know and we'll break that down while we go through a few of our players. But Grapefruit's in here and he said, do you guys think De'Ami Brown is going to be a huge riser as the new Jags wide receiver too? I'll start here. I'm a Washington fan, so I've watched every single Washington game for several years. De'Ami Brown's successful run for Washington came in literally the playoffs. That's it. That's pretty much the only thing he's ever done. It just happened to be when it was all nationally televised. So, no, I'm not going to pencil him in as the wide receiver too. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I think, as the cap goes up, I think sometimes our brains kind of get stuck in 5 years ago where $10 million for a wide receiver seemed like a pretty good contract 3, 4, 5 years ago. But right now, man, there are just mid-tier guys that's kind of the going rate. I mean, to answer the question with a question, are you excited about Tutu Atwell? They got the same contract, and I don't think in any sense, like, it really kind of feels the same to me, where it's like, yeah, like, De'Ami Brown will probably have 2 games next year that you could play him, and good luck picking those games. Now, if he's on my bench, am I cutting him because of this news? No, not at all. And I don't think this is a bad thing for his value. I think it's a good thing for his potential value. But I mean, Gabe Davis got a better contract with the Jags last year. That amounted to nothing. So I think in general, just we have to be able to disconnect our brains from, we can be excited, but it doesn't mean that we have to then make a move off of that excitement in our Dynasty league. And I think that's a very important thing I've learned playing Dynasty fantasy football, is that you can be excited without trading for a player. So
100%. 100%. And he even adds, maybe a third rounder for De'Ami. I mean, listen, man, if you've got that belief De'Ami Brown's the wide receiver too, and you want to send your third round pick, I'm never going to tell you not to believe in your gut, because you should. Because sometimes it hits. When you do, it's the best feeling in the world. But me personally, I would not make that move. I'd rather make the dart throw of some rookie out there, whoever it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, if you just for Mr. Grapefruit, love the profile picture, by the way, Mr. Grapefruit. That is absolutely fire, man. I think with a guy like De'Ami Brown, my suggestion, and something that I love to do in leagues, if I have guys that I just like but really aren't worth that much, is can I move back in the rookie draft, maybe 10 picks, and just pick up De'Ami Brown, right? Can I move from 3-5 to 4-5 and just get De'Ami Brown if I believe in him? Because that's technically a value jump for the person trading up. But I've kind of been one of the belief that kind of once you get past 2-8, 2-9, I think a lot of those picks start to kind of look a lot closer to each other than people think. So that's a great way to kind of get these bottom end guys onto your teams if you are excited about them, for sure.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, let's just jump to our next player here. And ironically, when I throw the board up here and we talk about George Pickens, that's where I was going to go. Look who's right next to him, DK Metcalf. Earlier in the week, when we actually went over DK trades, he was a little further back, and now these two are right next to each other. And so I think that's pretty interesting when we really break down this Pittsburgh offense. It's going to be interesting. There's a lot of ego in that wide receiver room. We'll see who ends up throwing the ball because there could be more ego with Aaron Rodgers coming into town. But I've been on record saying I think Jackson Dart might be the pick here. So I stand by that. But let me just start first with Pickens' value, Sam. What's your thoughts on Pickens? What do you think of him?
I mean, I think it's tough at the moment just because we don't know who's going to be throwing him the football, right? So, I mean, in a sense, I don't think I would be making any big moves with George Pickens because we don't really know who the quarterback is. And I think Pickens has always kind of been one of those tough guys, man. It's like you watch him play and he looks so good and he makes some plays that are absolutely crazy, but then he kind of gets stuck in this run heavy defensive kind of scheme that the Steelers run in. So, I mean, for me, if you're asking me buy, sell, hold, I think Pickens is a hold. I mean, he has some pretty good receiving EPA numbers. Like he's definitely a above average wide receiver. He's young and he could still develop into a role. And I think him and Metcalf kind of do belong together, but I think I would probably lean Metcalf if that's a trade that was sent my way.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there too. Pickens versus Metcalf, it just feels so similar to me. Like them being right next to each other is so appropriate in my mind. Pickens, you get a little bit more youth. You might be able to say he's got the better breakaway speed right now. And I don't mean that because DK's almost the exact same. Like it's really tough to say because these guys really do just complement each other. I'm really intrigued to see what they do with their draft pick and kind of what route they go because there's still so much unknown of who's going to throw the ball, what's going to happen with that offense before I really want to jump off and make any decision. But that's not to mean that I wouldn't make a trade for Pickens because sometimes it's about taking those risks and seeing what you can go get. And in fact, Pete and I have been in several discussions over trading for George Pickens in a league that we're both in. But let's just jump right here. First trade that catches my eye is George Pickens for a 2025 first. We don't get to know what actual pick this is, but just assuming, what's kind of the cutoff for you, Sam? If you were moving George Pickens, would you want a 2025 first, and where would that fall?
I think it would really depend on my roster, and I would be assuming this is probably a late 25 first, which is probably the assumption you're coming in with. I don't think it's very realistic that anyone's moving Pickens and getting back 1-3 or 1-4 or anything like that. But the thing is, and we don't really know this until the draft capital comes out, but there is a perception that this is a weaker wide receiver class. And so if you are a George Pickens believer and you're talking to someone that, is interested in a late first round pick, I think that's about the right price. I think you have a guy who's shown upside, but he has some downside. And that's kind of what you're going to get with a late first round pick if you're looking for a wide receiver. Now, I think where the interesting value comes is if you're targeting running backs, I could totally see being on the other side of that, where I would probably take a late first if I want to go get a running back in what is perceived as a deeper running back class this season.
Yeah, well said. I couldn't agree more. If I'm a team looking for a running back, grabbing this late first is probably the good way to go. Now, my advice would probably be wait until you see the draft board so you can actually make sure you get one of those guys. Because, we've talked about several times, what happens if 4 running backs are drafted in the first round? They're probably going to go in the top 7 picks. So if you're trading for the 109 to go get one of those guys, you're probably not going to get it. But yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. You mentioned if this class as a wide receiver, if it's going to be a deeper class or not. There's a lot of people hating on this class. I know I did the wide receiver rankings for Face Off, so that's there if you want to go back and watch those. And for me, there's several guys that I think are pro ready and are going to have impacts. There's maybe not the Jamar Chase, Brian Thomas level player in this class, but there's certainly people that have fantasy upside. So, you might be able to grab one of those guys at the late first. I mean, I talked yesterday on the show about how I got a Brian Thomas at the 111 and Ladd McConkey at the 202. So, it happens. Those guys are there sometimes. You just got to make sure you hit on it. But let's look at a couple more of these. There's another one of George Pickens and a third for a first. That's basically the same thing. Here's one: George Pickens or Terry McLaurin. Where do you fall on that?
I think that is just a perfect rebuilder contender trade, man. I would imagine that if you're trying to win some games, I totally understand getting Terry McLaurin on your team, as he's probably going to outscore Pickens the next 2 years. But Pickens is a young guy, and I think we'll see with his career. Sometimes in fantasy, it's a tough thing in Dynasty, right? Is you need to look a little short-sighted if you're trying to win games, but you can view things a little longer if your team is a rebuilder or if you are retooling per se as well. So I like that trade. And I think that seems like a pretty good value for Pickens. I think if you could use him to maybe get someone with a little hype, if you have a guy that's a believer, but I'm not selling low on him with the news of DK Metcalf, because I think there's plenty to go around in most offenses at this point in the NFL.
Yeah, what you said is perfect. This is the contender versus the rebuilder. I would imagine that the George Pickens owner is probably looking to get younger and take the shot of, we don't know who his quarterback is. They added another wide receiver. Is he the one? All those question marks. That's a risk you take. So I'm not going to fault you for moving Terry McLaurin. I think you got value. Where on the flip is if you're trying to contend and you said, well, I know I've got Terry McLaurin who just had a top 12 season and he's attached to Jaden Daniels. I'm not going to fault you at all for that either. So that's a great example of a good trade right there. Both teams maybe accomplishing what their goal was. But let's just keep moving along and let's move up the board and let's change positions. And let's talk about Chase Brown. Chase Brown, when we're looking at the board here, he's 61 overall, first pick of round 6. I don't know if Sam probably doesn't know this, but we just did a buy-sell video on some running backs, and Chase Brown was a sell for me. So I'm sure I'll catch some flack for that. But let's start there. What's your thoughts on Chase Brown?
I mean, sadly for the interesting level of this segment, I do agree with you. I don't know. I think I do like Chase Brown, and I think there's a lot of situations where it's not that I would just be selling him to sell him. It really all depends on what you're getting back in return. But Chase Brown to me kind of falls in that category where he is a running back that is very good in his current situation. But we don't really know if that current situation is going to be his reality, let's say a year from now, where they add another player in there and maybe that player is just more efficient than Chase Brown. I mean, he's a very good player, but it's because the Bengals featured him very heavily this year. Let's not forget that they wanted to kind of go with more of a tandem with Zach Moss, which, that may be out the window. Maybe they do kind of take Chase Brown down a bit and try to give some touches, bring in Samaje Perine in. I'm not threatened by that necessarily, but I'm curious what's going to happen with Zach Moss, if he's getting cut or if he's just going to be healthy and kind of return to some sort of role in that offense. But, in general, I prefer to be on the side of, unless the guy is an absolute stud running back, I am totally fine selling him and regrouping and using that value to build my team come August. Whatever you want to say,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you totally summed up basically everything I said on the video. For me, it just really comes down to, I think Cincinnati is still searching for that running back. I said all season, the number one player they missed was Joe Mixon. Like, they truly missed him. They had no real run game. They struggled at times. They didn't get a bunch of push up front, but Chase Brown, that's not his game. He's not between the tackles, handling the ball 20 times. He's great out of the backfield. He does a lot of things really, really well. But just the way I view it, he doesn't look like that alpha running back or the guy that's going to command a room. So I expect them to draft someone. I expect him to probably get replaced or at least have a running mate. You mentioned that they tried to do that already in the season, and I'm blanking on who did they trade for mid-season from the Bears?
Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert.
They traded for him mid-season. His first carry, he fumbled. So, he was in the doghouse right away. They were trying to find that guy, and it just never really worked out. And Chase Brown was just the benefactor of it. And when we're looking at the board here and we see him at 61, I see the 106 right there next to him. I would much rather have the 106 than Chase Brown. The 107, 108, same thing. I'd rather have both those picks over Chase Brown. I just think there's a lot of value to be gained from the names around him right now and where he's associated. And if they do draft someone, his value is going to plummet. It's not going to be anywhere close to where it's at right now.
Yeah, just a fun little stat for those people that are a little more, whatever, stat heads, whatever you want to call them. I mean, I think kind of going along with what we're saying is I'm looking right now in 119 of Chase Brown's carries last year out of 229. So that is over 50% of his carries came against what would be called a quote light box, which would be less than 7 defenders. So the thing is like he's a good player and he's a good player in that offense, but he wasn't really being put up against stacked running boxes due to the way the Bengals play. Now, on one hand, you could say they're not going to change their offense, which I would agree. But kind of like Matt was saying, is it worth the risk if you can get out from under him and maybe replace him with a veteran and some draft capital or something along those lines and really not lose too much production?
Yeah, totally agree. Well, let's look at some trades for Chase Brown here and see kind of what we have. Several Chase Browns for a first as of 3-8, 3-8, 3-8. And I think we kind of both agree we'd rather have the first over Chase Brown. That's, okay. Well, let's keep looking here.
Maybe
Golly, there's so
112.
many
I
people.
think 112, I could argue Chase Brown just due to you being a potential repeat contender, I guess, where you don't want to take a chance on a rookie. But I mean, yeah, scrolling down those trades as you're looking like this looks like a lot of firsts. Chase Brown for Jalen
Yeah.
Waddle. That's an interesting
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, let's sit there for a second. I mean, this is a 12-team start 10 full PPR league. So both these guys who are pretty good receivers, Chase Brown out of the backfield, that is. Here, I think I lean Waddle. I think I'd rather have Waddle knowing I can have a solidified wide receiver that's plug and play in my lineup versus Chase Brown, who I already have my doubts on. I think I'd much rather have Waddle.
Yeah, I would lean Waddle in this one too. And it's just a team building thing, right? Now, if I was really deep at wide receiver and I had no running backs, totally. But I'm also just not going to trade for a running back in March unless I'm getting a really good deal. And I think that's the thing is I will take the risk on certain players. You know, last year I took the risk on Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, and that paid off. But that's not the situation that Chase Brown is currently in. That's a very different situation. And also, Chase Brown is not being discounted. Veteran running backs may be discounted at this moment, but the fact that he's going for a first round pick in all these senses is it's kind of like, you know, you can have him. I'm good. I'll hang tight. And if you know, if I'm totally wrong, I'm happy to just have my first round pick and move on with my life.
Yeah, me too, man. I think that's well said. Here's another one of Jaden Reed and Chase Brown for Josh Downs and Jamison Williams. That's kind of a doozy. I'm curious where you fall here. I mean, a lot of this is going to come down to what do you view Reed and what do you view Jamison Williams and Josh Downs? I mean, those are the three players we haven't talked about, but you know, Downs' value has significantly risen since this time last year. Jamison Williams, he kind of had his breakout party a little bit this year. We saw the flash he can be. And then you have Jaden Reed, who has so much potential, but the usage is a major problem. I mean, he's never had a game over 80% of snaps. He doesn't really get a ton of targets. He's a lot of manufactured plays. And listen, I'm a Michigan State fan, so I love the guy. He's fantastic. But, you know, in this situation, I think I'd lean Josh Downs and Jamison Williams.
Ooh, see, I'm actually on the other side of that one, but
Ooh.
I just like Jaden Reed more. And even though we were talking about, you know, maybe not buying Chase Brown at the moment, I think the thing is like, even if I'm acquiring Chase Brown in this trade, it does not mean that I then have to just hold him for his whole career. I think you could maneuver him into an asset potentially better than Jamison Williams and Josh Downs. Just like we were saying, I mean, let's take, you know, my mind's just running now, but like, let's take those two trades. We make that trade, then we flip Chase Brown for Jalen Waddle. And now all of a sudden you're like, wow, I just, you know, and I would take Jalen Waddle over Downs and Jamison every single time. So,
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep carrying on here, and let's talk about someone. This is a little impromptu, so I didn't prepare Sam for this, so I'm going to throw him to the wolves here. But let's talk about Javonte Williams, because I'm just curious where he is. I don't know if anybody has seen the news, but he got a 1-year deal in Dallas, so there's going to be a lot of buzz about Javonte Williams here. He's 180 overall on the board, so he's at the back end of the 15th round. Now, what I know is Javonte Williams and Dallas Cowboys equals overreaction, so that I expect to shoot up probably pretty high as we approach the NFL draft. But let's start there, Sam. What's your thoughts on Javonte Williams? Do you have any interest in this Dallas offense with him coming in there?
I mean, interest in the Dallas offense, yes. I mean, I think even with last year, it was shown that even Rico Dowdle had some stretches where he was a usable RB2 flex kind of player. Now, when it comes to Javonte in that offense, I think 1 year, $3 million doesn't really scream super exciting to me. And just the fact that we still have the NFL draft, we still have more free agency. It does not mean this is the only running back. For all we know, they got Javonte Williams. Now you trade for Javonte Williams, and they're also going to re-sign Rico Dowdle 2 days from now. And I just think there's too much uncertainty for me that, if I would be willing to move Javonte Williams, I understand holding him, but I'm definitely not using this news to message the guy that has Javonte Williams and ask him what he wants for him, because his answer is going to be higher than I would ever want to pay. And I would rather just kind of stay out of it and go attack veterans that I prefer to own instead of Javonte Williams.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm going to look for other names or other opportunities over Javonte. But just kind of looking here, we'll just look at a couple of these trades. Nothing as of today, so we'll have to watch to see if that updates. But there's Javonte Williams for Marshawn Lloyd. I think I'd rather take the shot on Marshawn Lloyd. I know that might be a little bit of a hot take to some people. And you kind of hinted at this earlier, but the biggest thing for me is when we're talking about trading for these running backs, I'm not really looking to give up significant capital unless I'm getting a significant back. If I know that running back is going to be the one and he's not going to get replaced, then I'm interested, because here's what I do know. This running back class is loaded, and don't be surprised if nearly every single team takes a shot on one of them. And some teams are going to take shots on 2 or 3 just because there's that many guys and there's a different archetype for whatever you want out there. You can go get a guy, and there's several options available to you. So I think a lot of teams are going to draft players, and it's going to really shake up ADP, especially rookie ADP, once we get some landing spots for these guys. It might change your perception. You might be the biggest believer in Caleb Johnson, but if he falls to the 3rd and Omarion Hampton goes in the 1st, then it's time to adjust your rankings because the NFL told you something. So always stay fluid with your rankings. That's what I always say. And I think it holds true when you're trying to manage your dynasty teams.
Yeah, I think with Javonte, just with the news, right? Him signing was like, what, 5 minutes before we hit record, I think, on this video, basically. I think I would pay a 3rd. I think I would be willing to pay a 3rd round pick for Javonte Williams on the hope that maybe he can do something similar to J.K. Dobbins last year, right? He's hurt, he was a little forgotten, and then maybe he comes in and he's in kind of a battle for the backfield. He wins out and he looks a little better, and then maybe you can turn him into a starter for the year or a 2nd round pick. But when it comes to the 2nd round pick, or even like you were talking about, man, there are some pretty good running backs that are going to slip in this draft, and especially in the rookie draft as well. And, you're going to start putting them up against where it's like, I would much rather take my shot on Devin Neal at 212 if he goes somewhere I like, or any kind of those spots where it's like, if Devin Neal goes to the Cowboys, I would prefer him to Javonte Williams. And I think that's kind of like the trade that you're now forcing yourself into making or looking at if you are willing to pay the 2nd to get Javonte, which I think is what it would take. Because my guess is in most leagues, whoever has Javonte Williams probably is the Javonte Williams guy. And he's not just going to give him up for nothing. He's been holding him this entire time, waiting for him to return to former glory, right? So
Yep. And that's the situation I'm in. I'm not a Javante believer, and I've got my 2 shares I was telling you about, and I'm just hoping somebody comes to buy him. So he's there. If you're in the league, just go get him. You can have him. But yeah, we're going to talk about a couple more players here. So we appreciate everybody who's been tuning into the stream. So if you've got a question or a trade or player you want to talk about, throw it in the chat, and we'll definitely go through that. But we'll continue to carry on here, Sam, and let's talk a little bit about Geno Smith. We've got obviously the big trade for him moving from the Seahawks over to the Raiders. What's your initial reaction to that?
I mean, I like it. I think it's good for the Raiders. I mean, I'm not projecting them to win their division anytime soon. You know, they got dealt a crap hand when it comes to being in a division with Mahomes and Herbert and now a surging Broncos team as well. But, you know, Geno Smith is an NFL quarterback, which is something the Raiders haven't had for a while. And I think he's going to produce fine. I think he's not going to much worse of a situation, to be honest. And you could almost maybe argue it's potentially better just due to the terrible offensive line play that he was playing with in Seattle. I think he got sacked 50 times last year, with it's not good, right? Like it's not a good amount. He was pressured over 240 times last year. Like, he was not in a good situation when it came to having time to throw the ball. And, you know, I think the Raiders have some weapons. Obviously, Brock Bowers is an absolute stud. I like Jacoby Myers. I'd imagine they add something. And, you know, I like Pete Carroll too, man. I think all of those things are good things for Geno Smith, where I would definitely be willing to potentially make an offer for Geno Smith if I'm looking for a QB3 and I'm a team that's competing in my Dynasty League. I think he fits that mold where I don't want him to be my QB1, but if you're looking for a guy that you can start in the correct matchups or just looking for a cheap quarterback for your team, I do think you could do a lot worse than Geno. And I would prefer him to the likes of Derek Carr, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers. You know, he's above that tier for sure.
Oh yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you said if I'm looking for my third quarterback and I'm a competing team, because I play like that a lot. I always try to have 3 if I know I'm competing, just because you never know what's going to happen. But if I can have Geno as my QB3, I'm totally comfortable with that. Let him play the matchups, play the bye weeks, do whatever you need to do. But he's definitely the guy that fits that role. So I would love to have that. You know, like you said, I think it's a good move for him. That team lacked a true identity last year. And, you know, they had struggles, and some of it was Geno's fault, but some of it wasn't. You mentioned the sacks. The line struggled at times. We had injuries with Kenneth Walker, and which has kind of been the history of him, but we can talk about that later. So I really think that it's probably a good rehoming for him. He can kind of settle in. You mentioned Brock Bowers. Jacoby Myers is a serviceable wide receiver who probably doesn't get enough respect. And I wouldn't be shocked if they do draft someone. If they took Ted McMillan at 6 overall or whatever they're picking, that wouldn't shock me. If they took, Luther Burden at the start of the second round, I could totally see that too. So it's someone that I think is going to surprise people with just how consistent he'll be. Because if he elevates the Raiders to just what the Seahawks were doing, he played well, that's a win for them. They haven't been relevant in forever.
Yeah, and I mean, he's going to the situation, right, where with Pete Carroll, who was the coach there when Geno resurrected his career a couple years ago. So
Yep.
I don't want to just say it's an obvious pairing, but like I do think we can't overlook that he wanted to go play for Pete Carroll, man. Guys like Pete Carroll. I like Pete Carroll, and I'm not even a Seahawks fan. Like, he's a very likable guy, and I totally get it. Another guy I'd be curious, maybe I'm just making this connection too. Maybe Tyler Lockett goes there. They get another veteran there that could maybe play outside. Just bring him over. Another guy that I know, obviously Pete Carroll, Geno Smith has related to. Tyler Lockett just kind of got buried a little bit on the Seahawks last year, but I really don't think you got to break the bank to go get Geno Smith, unless he's on one of those teams that has no quarterback depth and they really just aren't able to give up any of their pieces.
Yeah, well, let's look at some trades here. The first one that catches my eye, just because I have to, is Geno Smith here for J.J. McCarthy in a 4th. this is a trade I would advise against. I'd much prefer much prefer JJ McCarthy over Geno Smith. But that's just me. A lot of people aren't necessarily believers in him. This happened on 3-8, so maybe the manager had some sort of inside belief that Darnold was coming back, but unfortunately for him, it didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I would greatly advise against that. I would actually advise in buying JJ McCarthy. And some of these trades, man, just looking at it, it's like, dude, I don't even know. I want to be in these leagues, man. Geno Smith for Sean Tucker, a 4th and a 5th in 27. Loving that.
Yeah.
Geno 5th for a 25 3rd. I mean, if these are any indicator, he's very gettable at this point. I think some of the ones make a little more sense, like this Geno Smith for James Conner. Geno Smith, James Conner, and a 3rd for Bryce Young. I think that's an interesting trade. Just, are you a Bryce Young believer or do you want to get out of him? But I mean, he's definitely an attackable asset, I would say, just based on what we're seeing on the screen.
And you mentioned this trade with James Conner in the 3rd. If I'm a competing team, I'd probably take Geno over Bryce. Give me James Conner in the 3rd. So I'd take the package there. And, you mentioned that you wish you were in some of these leagues. Just to let you people know that these are trades pulled from Sleeper. These are not just inputted calculator trades. These are true trades that happened in real leagues. So it's really interesting to think about that some of these deals are out here. I mean, that one's a mess right there. I don't even know where to start. JJ McCarthy again. Let's look at here. Geno Smith for a 2nd. If you're a competing team and you need that 3rd quarterback and that's the 212, are you comfortable moving the 212 for Geno Smith? I am.
Yeah, I love that trade. I think that's the value. I think that's the fair trade right there is Geno Smith for a 2nd. I have a hard time imagining someone who would give up a 1st just because I think you could get a higher quarterback with the 1st or a younger quarterback potentially. But, quarterbacks in super flex leagues are very tough to come by. And sometimes you have to be willing to give away some of your picks to do it. And I'm pretty willing to trade my 2nd, 3rd, 4th round picks to get depth pieces for my teams if I'm trying to win games.
Yeah, totally agree. I'll do what I need to do to try and get that championship or the prize money, the trophy, whatever you're after. Just go get it if you need to do that. But let's look at Brian's comment here. He's got a trade for us. He says, my team is a top 4 team yearly, but need to get some picks from a taxi squad. Grade the trade. So he gave up Jamison Williams, and he got Javonte Williams, Jalen Polk, the 209, the 403, and a 26th 3rd rounder. It's a 12-team Superflex Dynasty, have tons of wide receiver and QB, need to build my running back and tight end depth. So, man, you gave up Jamison Williams, you get Javonte, you get Jalen Polk, who's kind of a question mark. The 209, I do like adding the 209. I talked last trade show about how I've been targeting those mid to late seconds just because I like a lot of people that are in that range right now. The 403 and then a 26th 3rd. I'm not going to put any sort of high 3rd round value on that just because it's so far away and we don't know what could happen to that person's team. But, in my eyes, I think I lean the Jamison Williams side here. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the logic, right? From reading the message here. He wants to get some guys on his taxi squad. I totally understand. And sometimes if you have a lot of depth, like you can be put in these positions. But I think where I kind of see a point where I really do prefer the Jamison side is when I read, I have a tons of wide receivers and quarterbacks. So you have some depth there. And now you just have a bunch of more picks that you are going to get more depth. But I feel like you probably need more starters. And I would much rather use some of this wide receiver and quarterback depth to tier up and get a tight end or tier up and get a higher for, can I use Jamison in 112 to get 1-3 to maybe attack Omarion Hampton or Travion Henderson if I like the landing spot. There are times to tear down and break a guy into pieces, but if you're a top 4 team yearly, I would say I want the studs. I don't want the 10 dimes. I want the dollar bill on my team.
Well said. I was just about to say, I always say, if I'm trading dollar for dollar. I don't want the nickels and dimes. I want to get the player in the deal. And a lot of times when I'm evaluating deals, I start with who's the best player in the deal. That I start at the top and work my way down. And here it's Jameson Williams. And it's not that you didn't get equal value. I'm sure if you plug this into some calculator somewhere, it'd tell you got an equal deal. And listen, if you hit on the 209, you can make this entire conversation irrelevant and you could totally flip this deal around. But just knowing what we know right now, I would rather have Jameson Williams because he's the only one that I truly could plug in my lineup right now and I'd feel okay. I don't feel that about Jameson or Javonte Williams. I don't feel that about Polk yet. The 209, we'll just have to see. The 403, more likely than not. And then the 26th third, you got to wait a year. But I do see what you're trying to do. Like Sam said, you're getting some depth. You're trying to get some more pieces. And, if your wide receiver room's something crazy, then, maybe you could afford it. And you could try and take those shots and get a few extra players down the road. And maybe you flip Javonte now. Who knows, man? There's lots of time before the season starts. But keep making deals and keep trying to accrue as much value as you can.
Yeah, and I mean, going off what you said, the first thing that came to my mind is, in this hypothetical situation, if you had asked me this question before the trade went through, that is the advice I would have given you. But the trade did go through, and you currently have these players on your team. I am trying to move Javonte Williams, just like Matt said. And then I think, as we start to finagle that trade, it's like if you get the 210 for Javonte Williams, the 212 or something, maybe you give up 4-3 in Javonte to move into the second round. All of a sudden, that trade starts to look a little better for me if I'm getting two guys out of this second round. Like Matt said, there's some guys that are going to slip to the late second that I think are going to be starters on a lot of people's teams come week 12 this upcoming season.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, Sam, well, we've hit the 42-minute mark. So we'll start wrapping up here, but let me ask you this question. Is there a guy out there that you're just screaming you need to go buy right now or you need to sell right now since we're talking about trades?
I mean, the thing is, man, I have a lot of guys I am always looking to buy, always looking to sell. That is why I love Dynasty, first off, right? Now, I think a guy, we already spoke about him. I think JJ McCarthy is a guy I was very interested in buying. I had a video I put out last week on how to get JJ McCarthy. Now, I think that may have sailed with the news of Sam Darnold signing somewhere else. I think some of the buy lowness of JJ McCarthy was built into someone potentially coming back. So I'm going to give you a deep one and a fun guy that I think is a little undervalued right now. And that's going to be Cole Kmet, tight end on the Bears. I just think people are overlooking him a little bit, and he really is not going to cost you much. When I was looking into it last week, Cole Kmet was tight end 18 on Keep Trade Cut. So I don't want to hear anyone say, oh, I can't get Cole Kmet. He's too expensive. He's not too expensive. I think Cole Kmet is a very good player. I don't think he's a great player, but obviously we're going to make the Ben Johnson connection. Sam Laporta was an absolute stud. Can Cole Kmet be 3/4 of Sam Laporta? If so, I think instead of being tight end 18, I could see him rising to the likes of tight end 9 through 12 maybe come the season. And I think he could be a serviceable starter or just depth guy for your tight end lineup. My trade idea was, can I trade Rashad Bateman? It's a fair trade on Keep Trade Cut. Not saying it's going to go through, but KTC is saying it's fair. And can I move a depth wide receiver I'm never going to start for a potential of a tight end who can increase in value come this season?
Oh, I would love that deal if I could move Bateman, who had a great year, by the way. If I could move Bateman for Cole Kmet, I'm with you there. We're only a year removed, and we're also often suffered by recency bias where he didn't have the best 2024, but the 2 years prior to 2024, he was a top 12 tight end. So there's value there. He's under contract. He was paid not this offseason, but last offseason. And I think he's got 2 or 3 more years on his deal. So he's going to be sticking around. The only real fear you have is Chicago going to draft one of those big name tight ends at the start of the draft? Very possible. It could happen, but I don't really expect that. I keep screaming that I think it's going to be Genty to go at the 110. and all the signings and trades they've done in the coming weeks of bolstering that offensive line, I think would fit perfectly, because you can absolutely roll out there with Cole Kmet being your tight end one. Is he the best blocker? No, not necessarily, but he's a solid receiving threat. And the more comfortable Caleb gets in the pocket now that he has time, I think that only helps a guy like Cole Kmet.
Yeah, and exactly, like, the thing is he's currently like not even a tight end one rated on any of these rankings, calcs, ADP, whatever you want to look at. So even if they draft someone, you are not really losing out. I will give up the Rashad Batemans, the whatever that tier of wide receiver is. I really don't think you're missing out on much. The De'Ami Browns. Can I use this De'Ami Brown news to go get Cole Kmet? I'll even give you Tutu Atwell for free. Like, that's what I'm doing right now, man. Be like, dude, he got $10 million. So
yeah, I love that. Can you use the news to go get Cole Kmet? You should. I'm totally with you. You should. It's worth a shot. I mean, I think you could probably just send a 4th round pick in some leagues, because for whatever reason, he does have a lot of hate associated with his name. I do wish Coach from the Mediators was with us. He's a Bears fan, and he roasts Cole Kmet all the time. So he could be the other side of this coin. So we'll have to save that for another day. But you mentioned JJ McCarthy to start this. He's 50th player overall. He's a buy for you. He's a buy for me too. Like, I'm really intrigued. He played well when he had the chance. His opportunity at Michigan was certainly limited, but when he did throw the ball, it was very successful. That team was pretty dang good.
Yeah, I just think with JJ McCarthy, man, to me, it's just one of these things I don't really want to overthink it, right? He has Kevin O'Connell. Let's look at the past couple seasons, the quarterbacks under Kevin O'Connell. Like, Joshua Dobbs looked amazing for a stretch. Nick Mullins, serviceable. Kirk Cousins looked amazing. Went away from Kevin O'Connell, looked terrible. Sam Darnold looked the best he's ever looked under Kevin O'Connell. So you give this guy potentially the most talented quarterback of that group, and a player who's being valued below some other guys, basically just due to him sitting out last year, right? Michael Penix was ranked ahead of JJ McCarthy last week when I put my video out on Buy Low. And now it may not be the case anymore with the Darnold news, but the thing is McCarthy is not up there yet. You put this guy halfway through the season, he starts looking good. Wouldn't be surprised to see him be a top 12 dynasty quarterback come week 6 this year, with those weapons and that coaching staff and offensive playbook, basically.
Yeah, I just went and looked really quick. He's QB 16 over on KTC. And then I don't remember what he was over here. Let me double check. Nope, that's not it. Yeah, it looks like he's still floating around that range, QB 15 over here. So I'm with you. I'd go get him if I can. I think that's just a little too low. I think the reward for him paying off could be huge. You mentioned all those quarterbacks that played under Kevin O'Connell, and they were, like you said, serviceable, good, or had their best year ever. So I'm going to believe in Kevin O'Connell and that offense, not to mention they have the best player in football that's not a quarterback in Justin Jefferson. So whoever's attached to that guy is someone I'm interested in having, because he's pretty dang good at football. But I think that's going to wrap up the show for us. I want to thank everybody who's here. Be sure to like the stream, comment below if you have another player you want to talk about, or let us know a trade, and we're happy to come back into the comments and evaluate that. Sam, I really appreciate you jumping on the show with us. We're really excited to have you on here with us, and we're looking forward to our next one. Hopefully we can continue this trade talk and maybe make it a weekly show or something like that, because I love talking about it.
Yeah, me too, man. Happy to be on. Had a great time. If you guys want to find some more stuff by me, look up Dynasty Drip. Maybe I'll shoot my name in the comments and just comment on whatever, and that'd be my channel as well. But thank you guys for tuning in. I had a blast, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. Yeah. Go follow Dynasty Drip. You can follow me at the FF Mediators on X. Be sure to subscribe to the Face Off Sports Network. We've got all sorts of content coming out, all sorts of content we've already produced. It is full Dynasty mode. We are ready to talk about the draft. We've already talked about the combine. We've got the new league year coming up. It's free agency season. It is the best time of year. But be sure to check us out, and we'll catch you next time.